Empire. Dealing with head injury, the tech has advanced.
9 different tests. It takes about 7-8 minutes to take the test. Very similar to playing with gamified. It works very similar to playing a video game. And these tests are measuring these different parts of your brain.
That's Mike Piha, CEO of HItCheck, a testing system that is helping diagnose the severity of and recovery from concussions. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. The issue of head injury in contact sports has been publicly discussed and debated for some time now, and sports in general are making a number of changes in the name of safety, including less practice, oftentimes practice with less sanctioned hitting, and obviously a lot of development in protective gear. But concussions can't be avoided, and for some whose athletic careers are behind them and occurred before all these measures took hold, there is a need to deal with the ramifications. Our guest this week is Mike Piha, who's the CEO of HItCheck, which is a mobile cognitive assessment aid that helps track individuals' unique brain performance over time. Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
So tell our listeners a little bit about HItCheck and what you guys do.
Yeah, so HItCheck is a mobile app that's available on any mobile smartphone, and it helps screen for signs of concussions. So the way that the app works, it's used by teams, mainly in high schools, youth leagues, the collegiate level, and in some sports at the professional level. And the way it works is you download an app and you take a baseline test. A baseline test consists of 9 different tests. It takes about 7-8 minutes to take the test. Very similar to playing with gamified. It works very similar to playing a video game. And these tests are measuring these different parts of your brain. Once the baseline is completed, it's stored in the cloud. And if something was to occur or a suspected concussion, you retake the test and it compares the results, what we call a post-test, to the baseline test. And it gives you indications if there's cognitive decline in any of these areas. The areas are such as memory, long-term, short-term, balance, things like that. So it takes about, again, 7 minutes to take the test. It's usually administered by an athletic trainer or somebody from a medical professional background that can take a look at it, and then it just gives you an indication if there's a decline in your cognitive behavior, and for further review.
So do you answer questions? How does this work?
Yeah, it's more activities. So, for example, one of the tests consists of a memory test. So 7 words will come up on the screen. They're in circles. They come up and it tells you to memorize the words. And then they'll disappear, and then about 30 words come up. And they're all in little circles around the phone. And then you have to find the words that were the 7 words that were on there originally. So that's measuring. And then there's one where there's the phone is used as a balance, and you're basically holding the phone up and you're standing on one foot and you're actually balancing the phone, and you're trying to keep it, there's colors in there, you're trying to keep it green, and every time it slides off if the phone moves off. So if you're concussed, you're not going to be able to stand up and the phone's going to start moving. It's going to go red, and you keep trying to bring it back to green. And then there's one which we call the coordination test, which you're holding the phone and there's a car in a road, and you're basically trying to drive the car down the road with the phone. So very similar to a video game experience. There's a color recognition test where you're recognizing colors. So it just asks you, is this red? And, or is this blue? And it asks you different colors. So it's basically activities. So they're not questions, they're more activities that you're performing.
How do you take into account, because this happens in a game and you want to assess somebody. How do you take into account adrenaline, fatigue, those type of things that go alongside with trying to correctly assess somebody's health at that moment?
We've done, obviously several clinical studies and studies with athletes under a pretty high stress, fatigue, during a game or just running or, even on a treadmill or something. We'd test these individuals. So, the test, obviously the baseline test is taken, before, there's a hit or before anything. So it's at a normal state, what we call it. The post test will be taken. Usually it's not, immediately after the hit. It would usually be, 3 to 5 minutes after the hit, or it could be an hour after, a suspected hit. But the studies that we've done, where we've put high levels of stress on the athlete versus no stress at all. The comparisons are very similar because when the brain's affected by cognitive or a concussion, you're going to fail these tests no matter what. There's another question that, because it's very similar, like I said, to a video game. What if an athlete just practiced and practiced and practiced? Are they going to be better at the test? When they take it, when they're at a cognitive state, of a severe hit or something. And the answer is no. They're not going to be able to do it. The tests are pretty random, and it's still. Well, if the issues that affect your brain, you can't control. There's nothing you can do. You can't control them. And like I said, even at a high level of, for example, balance, where you're standing there with balance, if you're fatigued, your balance still can be at a fairly high level. If you're concussed, your balance is completely off. So there's a big difference between that, and we have different deviations where it's being measured. So you could have, there's 3 levels of deviations. There's normal, and we color code them. There's an orange and there's a red. A red is 2 deviations away from your normal state. And that's, when anything is in that particular level, there's usually, through our tests that we've done, it's usually over 90% accurate that there's some sort of cognitive decline in your normal.
All right. So this feels like a naive question, but there's part of me that goes, when I think about this, like, it's got to be scary for someone who is
realizing
in real time they're failing this, right? Like, how do you kind of go through or think through the dissemination of, you clearly have a concussion? You know what I mean?
Well, like I said, most of the tests, it's recommended the test is done by a medical professional. And what I mean by a medical professional is obviously an athletic trainer or an MD. So they're administrating the test to the athlete, and the athlete's taking it and they realize that they're failing the test. But I think it's probably the biggest problem that we have out there is the reason we came up with our medical team that came up with the idea of taking a test and making it more user friendly, making it a quicker test than what's been out there, is that early detection is just super critical to identifying if there's a problem, because a brain injury is an invisible injury.
Yeah,
it's not like a knee injury or an elbow injury where you could see there's definitely something wrong, or you can't walk, or you can't move it. It's not easy to detect a brain injury, and you'll have athletes go to a different doctor and they'll get a different diagnose on a concussion. Say, hey, you're okay, you're fine, or say, no, this is severe.
Yeah.
So depending on the doctor. So yeah, it could be shocking for an athlete, and and then there's the problem that most athletes don't want to leave a game,
right?
And they don't feel because they've been hit, and maybe they're even knocked out, but even if they're just hit and they get a little dizzy or something, they want to get back in the game, and a lot of times the coach wants them back in the game. So that's the problem that we're really tackling is, it's such a difficult injury to detect, and we're not detecting a concussion. We're basically detecting signs of, a decline in your brain.
Yeah.
And that's basically what we're trying to do, is help out the individual that's making that decision and giving them some, accurate data. Because the app's also the test is also used for recovery. So, if you're, let's say the issue, an incident happens, the athlete fails the test, goes and sees a, medical expert, could be the next day, and they said, yes, you definitely have a severe concussion. You're out for, 10 to 15 days or longer. During that period, you can continue to take the test and just monitor where you are, and you can almost self-monitor, by taking the test every day. And you're not gonna be able to return to play until that medical professional gives you the thumbs up. But you can continue to take the test and share the data with that medical professional,
Yeah.
and they can kind of see your progresses, throughout the, whatever the protocol is. Usually it's 10 days.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I mean, like, I listen, I'd rather know than not know, obviously, if I was someone who was affected by something like this. But the human nature part of this always goes to, you take tests for any other medical thing and the doctor says, I'll give you the results. They don't do it in real time on you. Or if you're in an accident, what's the first thing that the medical professionals tell you to do? Try to be calm. Like, be calm, be calm. We're going to try to calm you down. This feels like potentially there's a stress add to it. And I don't know if that exacerbates any of it or not. Maybe it doesn't. You know what I mean? Maybe it doesn't exacerbate it.
Yeah, one comparison that we use is, a thermometer. If you're taking your temperature, if you're not feeling good and you take a temperature and you have a high temperature, something's wrong, but usually you don't know what it is. You just know that your body temperature is not at a normal state. So, taking this test has some similarities to that, where, your brain isn't at its normal state. So, it's in the past, most concussions, if you ever experienced it as an athlete or seen, it's the CDC actually, provided a process where, you basically watch somebody's finger and you move the finger back and forth. And,
Yeah.
You watch their eyes, you ask them questions. We call these symptoms, and you're basically checking their symptoms for cognitive decline.
Yeah.
And usually the person doing that, if there's a trainer available or somebody, but a lot of times it's a coach or a parent or somebody that would do that really doesn't have the knowledge to even understand what they're doing. But that's been the way, that you've been able to do it. There are several, tests, physical and questions that you can ask to try to see, where they're at.
Take me through the time part of it too. Obviously, and you referenced this, there's some people that are just going to get up and say, I'm fine, and try to go back into a game. That's happened regularly. Maybe it's a little different now, but in the past, certainly that was the case, and against all advice, obviously, to do something like that. You said the test takes 7 to 8 minutes. That can be a lifetime in a game. Can you kind of take me through the idea of the length of time necessitated and how this works within the concept of it just happened and we want to diagnose this as closely as we can?
There are some protocols, and there's actually state laws in every state in most team contact, in most sports, and specifically in youth and high school, that if an athlete's removed from play just for a suspected concussion, they're not allowed to return. So in any sport, that's actually in all 50 states, that's the law. Now, does that happen? Absolutely not. It's not. In fact, there was I think it was in San Francisco, there was one of the news stations did a segment on this, and they went around to, I think, like 15 or 20 high school programs and asked them about it, and I think 95% of them didn't know the law exists.
Huh.
So, but in reality, if somebody's removed from, a suspected head injury, they're not supposed to return. The value of the app is it's going to give you an indication of how severe it really is. So, if you do remove them from, let's say the protocol is understood and they're not allowed to come back to play, you don't just take them out and sit them on the bench and say, hey, you might have a concussion, go see a doctor the next day. Taking the test really gives, the indication and collects the data, right after, in real time, right after the incident, where the medical person that's really making the call, if they're concussed or not, has information, that they normally wouldn't have. So that's the concept, but reality is that sometimes, and maybe most of the time, an athlete's removed, from play. A trainer will look at them, and that usually takes about 3 to 5 minutes, maybe longer, that they're, when they're removed from play. Forget they're using any type of technology or tool like HItCheck. It's usually going to take 5 minutes for a trainer to do the type of test they do if they don't have a tool.
Yeah.
Because they're gonna look at their eyes. They're gonna have them do some sort of balance test. So they're gonna and there's some standard what we call a symptoms test, and if you're familiar with it, it's called SCAT-5 is kind of the most one that's been around the longest, and it's 22 questions, and it takes about 3 to 4 minutes to take that test. So usually that time period is usually going to be around 5 to 7 minutes or longer, to examine somebody. So one of our goals when we put together the test, there's some other tests in the market that take 20 minutes or longer, and you even have to use a PC or you couldn't do it at a sideline or a locker room or even at home. So our goal was that we wanted this test to be in a time period that's not going to lose the interest, number one, of the test, because a lot of these younger athletes, just the attention span of trying to get them to take a test like that, sometimes, if it's 20 minutes, is they're going to lose them.
With your technology and others, and obviously, the public recognition of this problem, especially in many contact sports, there's obviously been some change. I'm curious your perspective on what leagues and teams and laws and schools are doing, and have you seen a concerted effort and has there been results of fewer head injuries happening in and around sports?
There's been a lot of change, especially over the last 2 years, or so I'd say 3 years, where there's been change. And, there's different areas that are important. One of them is education. So just understanding what a concussion is and learning about it. We have a partnership with a group called Crash Course out of Stanford University, and they put together a phenomenal education tool for athletes to understand, they actually do it kind of in real time to show what a concussion feels like and, what it really is. Because most especially young athletes have no idea. They just think, oh, it's a head injury. But what is it really? What does it really feel like? So education's really improved. I think it's given, parents, coaches, a little more confident in letting their children play a contact sport. So also the equipment, you can have the greatest, best protective football helmet on or whatever, and it's still not going to stop you from receiving an impact to your head, because you can get a concussion without an impact to the head. You can get one from explosion. In the military, we also work with the military, the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force, and explosions can cause a concussion. So it's not necessarily just an impact to the head. So, but the equipment has obviously improved, and all the manufacturers are helping to reduce the impact by the equipment that they have. And then the third one is the testing, and like our product HItCheck, the testing has improved. 5 years ago, there really wasn't a test on the market that you could take, in real time and right after. So, all three of those are the areas of concern that, everybody has, but they're areas that your question on, there is data that shows, the data's gone up that there's more concussions being identified, but that's because we now have tools to measure.
Yeah.
So we didn't in the past, and so no one was measuring concussions. So when it became, more of of an issue, I think the data's gone up. But there's also proof that the injuries from a concussion. I mean, there's statistics out there that say it's increased 5 times since 2010 that the youth athlete concussions have increased. But again, we're measuring them now.
Yeah.
And they weren't then. And then the big issue is that about 30 to 40% of athletes will return to play when they're concussed. In other words, they'll come out of a game, they'll come out of a practice, and it's more practice than games, where they'll come, like you're at a practice, kid hits his head, coach takes a look at it, and they go right back in. And that's where it can become really serious, because if you're concussed and you go back out, and if you're hit again, you could have some severe damage.
All right, last thing for you. You have a partnership with the NFL Alumni Association. So we've talked a lot about what's happening now and what we're trying to do to try to stem the tide of these head injuries. I think a lot of these players in the past didn't know what they didn't know. So how are you working with the NFL and other alumni of contact sports as they kind of navigate post-athletic careers?
Yeah, so we started conversations with the NFL alumni about a year ago. We just completed a partnership with them in early September, and what we're doing with them is, they have their mission is basically caring for their own. That's caring for the NFL alumni, but it's also caring for kids and caring for their community. So that's kind of the three areas that the NFL alumni is focused on. And so the caring for their own is basically their own alumni out there, and they're not going out and having contact right now, obviously, but they're really concerned about their health, but they're concerned about the health of the youth and within their communities. So there's 35 alumni chapters throughout the country, and one of our missions with the NFL alumni is for them to step up, and they have obviously in each community they have a lot of recognition as an athlete and somebody that can help the youth, and so they're going around. They're going to going around to the different high schools, youth programs, and really promoting our product and how it can help the programs, the youth programs, and the high school programs, and even collegiate programs out there. So that's kind of how the partnership is working. We work with Bart Oates, Lee Woodall, out of their headquarter office, and then some other athletes that have a high level of concern for that. So football in general and at the youth and the high school level is declining in certain areas at 20 to 30%.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of it is the concern for injury, and the majority of the parents that are concerned is the traumatic brain injury or head injury. So not that they're trying to promote, that you have to play, but they're just trying to promote that football can be a safer game, if we do the right things. And I already mentioned that earlier, but it's the right, having great equipment, being educated on what a concussion is, and being able to have the equipment like HItCheck where you could test, immediately up front and know when the athlete shouldn't be allowed to play anymore, because you're not get it any contact sport, you can't take the contact out of the sport.
That's right.
Or it changes the sport. I mean, there's even some statistics on flag football, because a lot of parents will say, well, I'm just going to have my son or daughter play flag football because it's not there's no contact in it. And flag football also has a level of contact, whether it's an elbow hitting a head or a head hitting a knee or a head hitting the ground. There's still risk of a cognitive or concussion in a sport like that.
Yep. Mike Piha is the CEO of HItCheck. Thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
On the next Future Sport podcast, we'll dive into the latest in sports tech venture.
And our idea is we want to bring the future of a fan and athlete experiences to life through those collaborations. And so we welcomed NBC Sports and a couple others this past year as new partners, but we have about 14 or 15 partners now and still growing.
That's Fielding Jamison, Senior Strategy Director with the Global Sports Venture Studio, where they're diving headfirst into innovation in the sports tech and media landscape. That will do it for this episode. As always, the future is now. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein.